everybody, and welcome back to Everything Else. I'm your host, Nick Stewart. It's been a minute, you guys. Did you even notice? Did you notice how long it's been? It's been almost a year since our last episode, and it's primarily because I was writing a book. I want to tell you all about that in a minute, and that's really what this whole episode is going to be about. But before I do, I just want to thank you for tuning back in and not unsubscribing in the interim, because I know when someone's not producing content, I tend to unsubscribe. And I have some business to get to for all you Patreon subscribers at the end of the show as well, but we'll save that for the end so we don't bore people. So here's the story behind the story. I worked on this book for a few years, technically, only seriously for a little over a year, but back in 2017, 18 maybe, I had an idea for a character who was this very successful biblical counselor, like theological genius, world famous, like Paul Tripp kind of guy. And this guy basically has lost his faith. And he's struggling with the foundational questions of it. And he hasn't totally forsaken it. And he knows, all the apologetic arguments against what he's feeling, but he's in a kind of a no man's land when it comes to his faith. And because of his uncertainty, he keeps doing his job because it's all that he really knows how to do. So over New Year's of 2019, is that how you say it? It was 2018 going into 2019. So I suppose that's New Year's of 2019. So I had a flu. And I was stuck in bed for a few days, so I finally had time to start writing something. But back then, I was really yet to, I don't know how to describe it. I wasn't a great writer back then. I could definitely put a sentence together. I was writing, some good blogs back then, but I knew nothing about story structure or character arcs or any of that. But I took a whack at it. I'd written, fiction before. I'd spent, most of my childhood writing fiction, but that doesn't mean that I really got anywhere with it and became good at it. I wrote a first chapter while I was sick, and then I just kind of shelved it. I just lost focus on it, and I would return to it every few months and edit it a little, but never would really do anything more with it past that point. So that's how it stayed for years. Flash forward to summer of 2021, I took a quiz from Jason Stapleton that was designed to find your specialized skills. And for me, fiction writing kept coming up over and over again. One of the questions was, what's something you enjoyed when you were 14, but you don't get to do it anymore? And I was always writing stories when I was young, but got more into nonfiction as an adult. So that's, really what I'd been focusing on for a long time. So rediscovering this thing I used to love, I figured I had nothing to lose by diving in and seeing what I could do with it. So I read a lot and watched a lot of videos about character development and Dan Harmon's Story Circle and John Truby's Anatomy of Story and stuff like that. And I really immersed myself in it. And those were the things that I felt I was particularly weak in when it came to writing. So then I decided I needed a project to work on. And that unfinished chapter about the biblical counselor came up in my documents. So I thought, hey, let's work on that. So at this point, it really feels like I'm working on someone else's story because I know all this stuff about story structure now that I didn't know when I started it. So I really took what was there and remade and reformed it into an all new story. And, it was a story that wasn't half bad as far as I'm concerned. So the work was just beginning at that point. I want to say it was July of 21, I believe. And I worked on that rough draft all the way until February of last year. I remember because I finished it during the ice storm. Most of that was written by hand, which is now my preferred way of writing, and I'm very glad I discovered that. So I did a first, second, all the way up to a fifth draft from then until September. And I designed the cover, I formatted all the documents and everything, and I ended up self-publishing through Amazon on November 29th. And it was really, truly a dream come true to have a book published, even if it doesn't mean as much nowadays because you do it all yourself, and like anyone can get published technically. It's not quite the accomplishment that it was 10 years ago, but it still meant a lot to me to have my name on a physical book and receive something in the mail, you know. So you're all caught up on how the book came into existence. And if you haven't read it, I'll give you my pitch for kind of what it's about and why you should read it and what you might get out of it. So Finn Miller is the name of the biblical counselor character who's struggling with his faith, and while he's struggling with those things, he's trying to expose corruption in the church's leadership. And I always wanted to write a story about church leadership corruption, and kind of the drama surrounding that, because it's something I've seen quite a few times, and I always thought it would make a great story. I've been in a few churches that have dealt with situations like that, and the thing that always fascinated me about how it plays out is, like, these are Christians, mostly. Well, sometimes I wonder. But for the most part, these are Christians who, for one reason or another, rally around someone in leadership who has done something wrong, and they inevitably compromise their beliefs in order to protect that person or those people. I've seen it be multiple people as well. And that's the thing that's always appealed to me about the idea, story-wise. In Black Threads particularly, Finn is dealing with this contradiction of not really believing what he's supposed to believe and still doing his job as a biblical counselor. While the board members and pastors are also kind of contradicting their beliefs to do their job, which weirdly, the job of a board member sometimes turns into protecting a leader who has sinned and covering up that sin rather than, upholding integrity among the leadership, which is what they really should be doing. So he embarks on this mission to expose corruption, and meanwhile has to deal with his own shortcomings because Finn isn't innocent either. Finn is also caught up in some heinous sin. I was really drawn to the theme of living a contradiction, and I think it's something, hopefully to a lesser degree, that we all deal with as Christians, hopefully not without repentance. We have God's law and believe in a biblical morality, a right and a wrong, and yet we constantly fall prey to sin. So in that modicum of an example, we deal with this problem of, at times, living at odds with what we really believe. And perhaps that reveals what we truly believe in reality. And that's another thing about contradiction that's interesting to me, is maybe we just think that we believe something, but our actions reveal that we believe differently. And when we sin, we put ourselves in the place of God. We believe that we have the right to do this thing, making ourselves the moral decider, even though the true moral lawgiver has said differently than what we feel, So maybe if you constantly lie to control situations around you, it reveals that you don't trust God to arrange the things around you for your own good. And it may also reveal that you put yourself in the place of the sovereign to control those events. You see how that works? And that's how most sins work. I've really never found a sin that doesn't apply to. Like, most sins are you somehow putting yourself in the place of God. So that's one thing I wanted to explore in the book. Another theme was the longing for oblivion. This is more of a subtle theme that's really threaded throughout the whole book, but not as prominent as the themes of like faith and justice and belief. This was a pretty self-indulgent choice for the book, if I'm being honest, because writing for characters who hate themselves and want to die is just fun. I hate to say it, but wildly self-destructive people are incredibly fun to write for. And the cool thing about these characters, cool, in a manner of speaking. The cool thing, I guess, about these characters is that everyone, except for maybe one or two of them, exhibit some form of self-annihilation, whether that's through drinking or suicidal ideation, ruining relationships, building up these hopelessly large expectations, in role models only to be really disappointed, or even to be, destroyed by their own ambition. Another thing that inspired the book was the story of Jim and Pam in The Office. In modern American storytelling, I think Jim and Pam are one of the ultimate love stories. They have a long story of how they came to be with each other that stretches over multiple seasons of the show. And as much as I may love Jim and Pam, you have to admit that their story is horrendous. Jim pursues her while she's engaged to another man. He ends up kissing her, and she breaks it off with her fiance, and then he ends up dumping another chick to be with her later. There's this tendency in love stories to justify adultery as sort of a means of overcoming something so the characters can find their true love. So I wanted to write a story that painted the opposite picture of adultery. One where no one ends up happy because of the infidelity. One where no one is really happy in the end, and something, that it's something that has disastrous consequences. And that brings me to the final note on the book, without spoiling anything, is that it is a tragedy. In classical storytelling, you have comedy and tragedy. Comedy ends happily and tragedy ends tragically. You get it. So of the two, this is a tragedy, and probably in ways you're least expecting. And that's all I'm going to say about that, I think. So I'm pleased to tell you that the book is available on Amazon. It's called Black Threads by me, Nick Stewart. You're listening to him. You can search for that on Amazon, or you can follow the link in the show notes to buy it. I'm also happy to say that I'm working on the next book. I've been writing it for a little over 3 months now. What's it? January 2nd, I think, today. So been writing it a little over 3 months, and that's coming along well. And it's a lot different than Black Threads. I won't say much, but mostly because there's always the outside chance that it doesn't, I don't finish it and it never comes to pass. But I think I can safely say it's a horror story, and I made many intentional kind of cosmetic choices to make it stand out against Black Threads. There's really no religious elements in the story as of right now. I guess I should say overtly religious elements. I think good and evil is always, kind of in the religious realm of things, but I wanted to go more metaphorical with this one, and that's just a luxury you don't have when you're writing a story about Christians in a religious setting. I think that's where a lot of Christian fiction like Frank Peretti and stuff kind of falls short, because it's really hard to be subtle when the characters believe such specific things. There's not a lot of moral ambiguity in Christian characters, and the morals of the story always end up being more overt than that, and it's also hard to leave certain spiritual elements ambiguous when the lead character, like in Black Threads, is a theological genius. If the lead character is a theological genius, then the narrative has to know some level of theology for the story to make, any sense, I guess. And this new story, also has absolutely no cigarettes, which if you haven't read Black Threads, you don't know, but I use that for some very convenient symbolism throughout the book, and even I think it got to be a little bit much. So there are a few things like that I did to really differentiate this new book, and I look forward to telling you more about it as it comes along. So maybe next week I'll read a passage out of Black Threads, and maybe I won't. Maybe you tell me if that's something you want. Maybe I just days ago got my copies of Black Threads in the mail, even though it came out over a month ago. So yeah, I just wanted to give you guys an update. I think this is our first podcast back. We're not going to miss, more than a week at a time from now on. This is going to be consistent through 2023. And I wanted to start out by talking about the thing that kept me from the podcast for so long, because I really did think about podcasting the whole time and really just couldn't justify spending any of my free time on anything other than the book until that was done. Like, I was very motivated to get it done. So now I'm glad to be able to share that with you guys, and I'm glad to be freed up to come back to the podcast. So thanks again for tuning in after such a long absence. This is not really meant to be the one-off episode to promote the book, even though that's probably how it comes across. This is our first episode back, and I'm hoping to remain consistent. So at the time, the book and the podcast and work and everything else in life just got to be a little too much to handle all at once. So I took what was meant, only to be a few months off from the podcast to finish the book, but it turned out to be a lot longer than I had expected. And I'm sorry about that, sincerely. You guys have been very loyal to me and to what I do, and I need you to know that I don't take it lightly. So I'm committed to providing you content. Now, a little housekeeping while we're on that subject of committing to producing content before we close the show out here. Patreon subscribers, man, thank you for your continued support. Big apology owed to you. And I thought that I had canceled all Patreon payments while I took my hiatus. And then one of you lovelies pointed out to me that you were still being charged and you had to end your membership. So that really bummed me out. Not because I lost a member, which sucked, but mostly because you guys were not supposed to be paying for something you weren't receiving. So I felt like a piece of crap when I realized I was still taking your money. You shouldn't be paying for something that I'm not producing. So I refunded you guys as far back as I could possibly go in the history of the payments, and that's all I was able to do. I've made sure that you haven't been charged since then by manually going in and pausing the billing cycle at the start of every month. So that definitely should not be happening anymore. If it does, please let me know. Which leads me to my next point. I will be resuming Patreon payments. I should qualify that. Let's say this. Let's be very careful about this statement. It is my intention, God willing, to keep producing this podcast at least once a week, if not more. And if I keep that up, I'm going to resume Patreon payments, I think, in March. My goal is to start charging again in March. That way you guys get 2 months, or I guess almost 2 months of free podcasts, and you have almost, 2 months to cancel your membership if you don't want to pay for it anymore. Either way, I totally respect whatever choice you make. I mean that. I don't want anyone to feel bad about whatever choice is right for them. But if you stick with me, I want to thank you in advance and just say that I don't deserve to have you as a subscriber. So sincerely, I mean this. Whatever you decide, I'm just glad you're still listening and give a crap about this at all. Listening to the podcast is the most important thing you can do to support. A review is up there. Supporting on Patreon is just, above and beyond what I deserve. So, also a new website coming up. For anyone who's still listening at this point, I've been working pretty hard on it. It seems my old website has been taken over by the Chinese. I'm really bummed about that one. Not the Death of Death website, but my Nick Stewart website got taken over, I guess. Someone owns Nick Stewart on everything. NickStewart.com, NickStewart.org, like all those, as well as all of the social media handles. So I was really stoked, I guess about a year ago, to procure NickStewart.net. And I thought that domain was on auto-renew, so that it would just keep renewing and I would own it forever. And I guess I was mistaken, because it is no longer in my account on the website from which I bought it. and it looks like Chinese spam when you log on. So that's life. I have now cornered the market on Nick C. Stewart. I am Nick C. Stewart on Twitter and Instagram, probably a few other social media platforms. I sign up for stuff and forget about it all the time. And I now own nickcstewart.com. That's the letter C, not S-E-E, like I see you. It's not up and running yet, but it will be very soon. It's where you'll be able to get the podcast, along with whatever podcast app you're subscribed on, my book, any blogs I write, maybe some other upcoming stories. That might be a good place to host like some short stories and stuff. And that's also where I'll be handling other business I conduct, because I am planning to start offering my services as a writer for sales copy, editing, and ghostwriting, among any other thing. So I look forward to announcing when that website is up and ready for view. If you haven't followed me on social media yet, like I said, I'm Nick C. Stewart on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter has been pretty great these days. No matter what they tell you, it's fun out there. Follow me over there and let's get canceled together. That's what I say. I mostly just reply to politicians and tell them that they suck. That's the kind of moment when you tweet at Joe Biden with the words, "You suck." That's the moment that you realize you're living in the future, and the future is great. Is there any other generation? Back to George W. Bush. You could not get close enough to the president to tell them that they suck, and now you're able to tell their public persona that is definitely not run by them that they suck. And that's pretty cool. I don't know. Thank you, Elon. So, all right, I think that's all I got for this one. So thanks for listening, everybody, and I will catch you next time.